Livestock areas located near forests or semi-wild regions often change significantly as the natural environment is affected over time. As tree-covered areas gradually decrease due to the expansion of farmland and residential zones, the natural food sources of foxes also become less abundant than before. This causes them to expand their range of activity in search of new food sources. At first, foxes only appeared in areas far from residential zones or deep inside forests. However, over time, they gradually moved closer to farms, livestock enclosures, and open areas around residential communities. The increasing frequency of their appearances caused farmers to worry about the risk of impacts on livestock in the area. During the early stages, foxes usually appeared alone at night or before sunrise. After many consecutive days, their numbers began increasing around farms and areas near residential communities. They moved quickly along fences, narrow paths, or low-light areas before disappearing rapidly. At times, several foxes appeared together before splitting up and moving in different directions. The distance between the fox's activity range and residential areas also became increasingly closer. Their repeated appearances over a long period showed that the fox pack had begun to consider this area as a familiar part of their movement routes and feeding grounds around the farms. As the appearances became more frequent, control operations began to be carried out in areas commonly used by foxes. Hunters spent time observing the routes frequently used by the animals to determine their activity range before setting traps. Trap systems were placed in various locations such as along fences, trails, or open spaces where foxes often crossed. Bait was also prepared during deployment to increase attraction. At the same time, bows and arrows were carried to support hunting when necessary. Hunters selected suitable hidden positions to monitor the entire area while waiting. After the entire system was fully set up, the hunters began keeping their distance and minimizing noise within the area as much as possible. As night fell, foxes gradually reappeared along the same familiar movement routes as before. Some approached the baited area and stopped to observe the surroundings before continuing deeper into the area. They moved through both narrow paths near fences and open spaces within their regular activity range. From hidden positions, the entire process was carefully monitored while waiting for the appropriate moment before the foxes moved deeper into the prearranged area. As they approached the pre-calculated area, the foxes began entering the exact activation range of the trap. The scent of the bait caused them to stop and inspect the area before moving deeper into the control zone. As soon as enough pressure was applied, the trap mechanism activated almost instantly and held the animal at the designated position. The entire process happened very quickly, leaving the foxes with little time to react or change direction. After the trap operated successfully, the hunters confirmed that the deployment location matched the familiar movement routes of the fox pack in the area. After one fox was caught in the trap, other foxes continued appearing around the farm area during the following nights. They moved along fences, trails, and areas with vegetation covered just as before. This showed that the fox pack had developed a habit of returning to places that had provided stable food sources for a long time. Hunters continued monitoring the same movement routes in case the foxes returned to the livestock area and affected the animals again. Controlling foxes is a process that requires significant time and patience. When their behavior is clearly understood and traps are placed in the correct locations, the effectiveness of control gradually improves and helps livestock areas remain stable over the long term.
It pretty much comes ready to go almost right off.
No longer confined to the quiet depths of dense forests, red foxes are now appearing increasingly close to human living spaces. In the past, their primary food sources were field mice, small rabbits, and birds hiding in thick undergrowth. However, as forests become fragmented by farms, roads, and expanding residential areas, their natural habitat has gradually shrunk. As a result, these animals, once accustomed to the darkness of deep woods, have begun moving along forest edges and slowly approaching areas marked by human activity.
Okay.
As this situation repeats over time, simple deterrent methods, such as turning on lights, creating loud noises, or placing temporary barriers only remain effective for a short period. If food sources are still present, red foxes will not leave entirely, but instead become more cautious before quietly returning. Because of this, in many rural areas, people have shifted toward more direct control methods, such as setting traps along the paths these animals frequently eat at.
Excellent.
In larger areas, or where foxes have grown wary after multiple encounters with food sources, metal foothold traps are often the first choice. These traps are placed directly along familiar travel routes and combined with careful camouflage techniques to create a natural appearance. For instance, a tire may be positioned above the setup, with bait or strong scented attractants placed inside, leading the fox to believe it has found another routine feeding opportunity.
And you put it down in there, like so,
around the trap. As natural as it, and then maybe we can have something come up tonight.
The trap is typically set just before the bait location and then covered with a thin layer of soil, dry grass, or fallen leaves to blend into the surrounding environment. When the fox lowers its head to investigate and steps into the precisely calculated spot, the mechanism is immediately triggered, securing the animal with an anchored chain system. Modern traps are designed to hold firmly while minimizing the risk of injury, allowing handlers to inspect and manage the situation in accordance with safety guidelines.
Perfect catch on him. Completely had it. We're going to remake that set. We feel like we have more predators.
After an animal is captured, the surrounding area often shows clear signs of disturbance, such as displaced soil, scattered leaves, and circular patterns around the anchor point. This is a natural response as the animal attempts to escape. Once the situation has been handled, the person managing the trap will level the ground again, check the entire mechanism, and replace the bait to continue controlling other individuals that may pass through dead-eye addition in areas close to residential zones or where a higher level of safety is required. Metal cage traps remain a common choice. These traps feature a sturdy, enclosed structure that safely contains the animal once it enters in search of food. They are often placed near trails, along fences, or in locations where cameras have previously recorded fox activity. Inside the trap, dried fish, meat scraps, or other strong-smelling bait are commonly used to trigger the animal's curiosity and feeding instincts. When the fox moves fully inside and activates the trigger mechanism, the cage door quickly shuts, keeping it contained and preventing escape. With their compact design and minimal impact on the surrounding landscape, cage traps are especially suitable for areas near homes, small gardens, or household-scale livestock operations. For this reason, they are often the preferred option when control is needed while maintaining a high level of safety.
Pretty little gray fox. I've never caught a gray fox like this one. Well, came in the trap. It's pretty good though. Our chicken house is not too far from here, so.
In many rural regions, trapping red foxes has become a familiar method in wildlife management as the distance between human activity and nature continues to narrow. When foxes repeatedly return to hunt, observing tracks, identifying movement paths, and placing traps in the right locations can help reduce damage and stabilize the area. If you find this content informative, feel free to leave a comment, and don't forget to follow the channel to explore more real-world stories about trapping methods, wildlife management, and life in rural environments.
Losses exceeding $800,000 in a short period, enough to make any farmer hesitate. In just a few nights, entire flocks of poultry vanished, leaving behind cold, empty enclosures and chaotic traces scattered across the ground. No longer isolated incidents, this had become a series of coordinated attacks by wolves. As the damage continued to rise, many farms faced the risk of collapse. And a pressing question began to emerge: how would they fight back? At first, everything seemed like a minor nuisance. A few animals went missing, a few unfamiliar tracks appeared around the fences. But in a short time, the situation escalated rapidly. The predators began returning more frequently, following familiar paths, even identifying weaknesses in the protection systems. Some farms reported losing hundreds of animals in just 1 week. What was once a small issue had now turned into a full-blown crisis. Under mounting pressure, traditional defensive measures were immediately deployed. Fences were reinforced, protective nets were installed more densely, and warning devices were put into use. However, their effectiveness only lasted for a short time. The predators quickly adapted, changing their approach, even finding ways to bypass what seemed like the safest barriers. A true battle of wits began to take shape. When passive solutions were no longer enough, a more proactive approach was introduced: direct control through trapping. But this was far from an easy decision. The method has always been accompanied by intense debate over humaneness and safety. Some argue it is the only way to protect livelihoods, while others call for less controversial alternatives. Even so, in practice, control still had to be carried out. Experienced individuals began with observation. They did not set traps immediately but instead monitored signs, travel routes, footprints, and access points to water sources. From there, movement patterns gradually became clear. Trap locations were carefully selected, often along the routes most frequently used. The setup process was carried out with high precision. Traps were treated to minimize foreign scent, then buried just beneath the surface to avoid detection. Anchoring stakes were driven deep to ensure stability. Bait was placed strategically, often combining strong scents with natural cues to increase attraction. Every detail was carefully calculated, as even a small mistake could cause the entire plan to fail. Throughout the process, safety remained the top priority. Operators had to approach from the right direction, use gloves, and minimize leaving human traces. After traps were activated, regular inspections were required according to regulations to avoid unnecessary risks. This was not just a control activity, but a process demanding discipline and high responsibility. Over time, these efforts began to show results. The number of attacks gradually declined, and losses became more manageable. Some reports indicated a significant reduction in farm intrusions. At the same time, the number of participants in legal control efforts increased, showing that this was no longer an isolated effort but a coordinated system. As environments continue to change and wildlife adapts more rapidly, every method will need to evolve. Ultimately, the choice is not only about effectiveness, but also about how humans balance protecting livelihoods and maintaining ecosystems. If you were faced with this situation, what would you choose? A forceful solution to eliminate the risk immediately, or a softer approach that requires more time? Share your perspective, because this is not just the story of a single farm, but an issue spreading across many regions.
Everything began very quietly. One morning, the farm owner noticed that the number of poultry had slightly decreased compared to previous days. There were no clear signs of disturbance, no loud noises during the night, just small losses repeating over time. Along the fence, a few footprints appeared, forming a thin and consistent line. At first, these details were easy to overlook because they were not very obvious, but as they continued to repeat over many consecutive nights, attention began to increase. What once seemed minor gradually revealed a problem that was forming and repeating in a pattern. As this situation continued, closer observation showed that the appearance of the coyote was no longer random. The traces repeated in the same locations and at similar times, usually during the quietest hours of the night. Cameras recorded images of a coyote moving quickly, low to the ground, and almost silently before disappearing into the darkness. The cause of this appearance came from changes in its natural habitat. When natural food sources decline, they move closer to human areas to take advantage of easily accessible food such as poultry, small animals, or leftovers. Once a stable source is found, they return repeatedly based on established habits. To control effectively, the first step is to identify the movement routes of the coyote. They do not move randomly but usually follow familiar paths such as forest edges, fences, or unnoticed trails. These routes help them stay hidden and move safely in human environments. When a path is used repeatedly, it becomes a stable habit that is difficult to change. If this pattern is not recognized, placing traps will not bring the desired results. Careful observation of repeated signs helps identify the exact areas that require intervention. Once the movement route is identified, trap placement begins in a calculated manner. The trap must be placed directly along the coyote's path, rather than in open or easily noticeable areas. The position should be discreet and aligned with their natural direction of movement. If the trap is placed incorrectly, the chance of contact is very low and can easily be ignored. Maintaining the surrounding environment unchanged is also important, as coyotes can detect even small changes in familiar spaces. Accuracy in trap placement plays a decisive role in control effectiveness. After the trap is placed in the correct position, bait is used to increase attraction. Familiar bait such as meat or naturally scented food often produces better results. The scent spreads through the quiet night air, stimulating the coyote's curiosity and natural hunting instincts. After setting the trap, the area must be left unchanged to avoid raising suspicion. Waiting is a crucial step, as coyotes tend to return based on habit and will not approach immediately if they detect anything unusual. After some time, the coyote returns along the same route it has used before. It moves cautiously, often stopping to observe and check its surroundings before getting closer. The scent of the bait draws its attention and keeps it in the area longer than usual. The combination of habitual movement and attraction leads it into the exact position that has been prepared. When all elements are set correctly, the trap begins to work as expected. This is the result of careful observation and preparation, not chance. Controlling coyotes is not a one-time solution but requires time and patience. When behavior is properly understood and suitable trap placement is applied, effectiveness gradually improves over time. The key is to maintain monitoring and make adjustments when necessary, reducing damage and maintaining stability for the farming area in the long term. Although it is not always directly visible, the signs repeat in the same way and at the same locations. When this situation continues over several days, the farmer understands that it is the deliberate presence of a predator and that timely action is required. Everything begins when the signs become clear enough that they can no longer be ignored. The farm owner notices that the number of poultry or small livestock decreases over a short period, no longer appearing as random loss. Upon closer observation, it becomes evident that the movement pattern of the fox is stable and follows a clear structure within specific areas. Foxes usually appear alone, moving quietly and discreetly, almost without creating noticeable noise in the surrounding environment. They tend to follow fences, trails, or edge areas with vegetation cover to remain concealed. These are familiar routes that help them avoid detection. If an area once provided food, they will return along the same path repeatedly. This repetition allows farmers to gradually determine the range of activity and the main direction of movement. As the signs become clearer, trap placement begins to be implemented in areas suspected of frequent activity. Farmers take action when they observe repeated patterns over several consecutive days rather than waiting too long. Locations near fences, narrow paths, or dense vegetation are often prioritized because these are the most likely routes for fox movement. Traps should not be placed in open areas. as this can make the fox more cautious and likely to avoid them. During the setup process, bait is prepared in advance to increase attraction. At the same time, the surrounding environment is kept unchanged to avoid creating unusual disturbances that could affect the fox's natural behavior. The main reason foxes return to these areas is the availability of accessible food sources within close range. As natural habitats shrink, they are forced to move closer to human-inhabited areas to survive. Farms with poultry, small animals, or leftover food become convenient sources of nutrition. Once a stable food source is identified, foxes remember the location and return repeatedly out of habit. Their high adaptability allows them to quickly adjust their behavior, increasing the frequency of their appearance if proper control measures are not implemented in time. After traps are set, adjusting their placement and configuration becomes necessary to improve overall effectiveness. Farmers should rely on real observations to optimize results rather than keeping traps in fixed positions for too long. Traps should be placed directly along known movement paths instead of random locations without clear evidence. The surrounding environment should remain natural and undisturbed, as changes can make foxes more cautious and cause them to alter their routes. At the same time, traps must be securely fixed and function reliably. Proper adjustments will increase the chances of effective control. After some time, traps need to be checked regularly, usually in the early morning or at night when the environment is quiet and easier to observe. In these areas, signs such as disturbed soil or small changes in the original layout may appear. These indications suggest that foxes have approached the trap site. Based on these observations, farmers can evaluate the effectiveness of the trap placement. If necessary, the position or setup can be adjusted to better match real conditions. Regular inspection ensures that the control process remains continuous and improves over time.
A little bag probably gets you through 1 to 3. Chew them off. And we gotta have them to be legal. Been having a couple pictures of this fella recently.
Controlling fox activity is a process that requires time and patience. When movement patterns are well understood and traps are placed correctly, effectiveness gradually improves. The key is to maintain observation and make appropriate adjustments to minimize damage while ensuring long-term stability and sustainability for the farming system.
Fine.
As darkness settles over the vast fields of Montana, the sound of panicked chickens begins echoing from behind livestock pens built along the edge of the forest. At first, residents assumed it was just stray dogs or small animals wandering out to feed at night. But only a few days later, a series of small tracks marked with sharp claw lines appeared along the creek banks and narrow trails leading down toward the farms. Infrared cameras quickly captured footage of a large red fox repeatedly moving through the area. It moved with incredible silence, barely making a sound as it slipped through the low grass before disappearing back into the darkness within seconds. In many rural parts of Montana, red foxes are appearing more frequently around small livestock farms. They are not large enough to cause the kind of destruction associated with wolves or bears, but they are dangerous because of their remarkable intelligence and patience. A fully grown fox can monitor the same chicken coop for several nights in a row just to locate the smallest weakness in a fence. They memorize food locations extremely quickly and almost always return using the exact same route if they were successful there before. What frustrates many ranch owners is how difficult foxes are to detect at night. They often use shallow ditches, tall grass, or low tree lines to conceal themselves while approaching a target. Many people have tried using floodlights or guard dogs, but foxes quickly learn how to avoid the most dangerous areas. That is exactly why many experienced hunters and trappers have turned back to steel foothold traps, an old method that is still considered highly effective when placed in the right location. Unlike the larger traps designed for wolves, foothold traps used to control foxes are usually smaller and carefully concealed. The trapper must closely study tracks, fox droppings, and small scratch marks around the area to pinpoint the animal's regular travel route. Even placing the trap a few inches off can leave it sitting untouched for days. Experienced trappers often choose soft patches of ground near fences, creek crossings, or tight corners along narrow trails where the fox is forced to step in a very precise spot.
From I think.
Concealing the trap itself requires an enormous amount of patience and precision. After digging a shallow hole, the steel foothold trap is secured with a heavy steel cable and then covered with fine soil and dry grass, so it blends almost perfectly into the surrounding ground. The most important thing is leaving behind no metallic scent or human odor. Many trappers even use separate gloves, clean soil, and sometimes lightly burn the metal before setting the trap in order to reduce unfamiliar smells that foxes could detect. Once everything is ready, bait is placed several steps ahead to force the fox directly into the calculated position. Some people use raw chicken meat, while many veteran trappers prefer stronger scent lures designed to trigger a fox's hunting instincts from a greater distance. But interestingly, many mature foxes do not rush in immediately.
And that's it.
Infrared cameras have captured them standing still and studying the area for several minutes, constantly sniffing the air and circling multiple times before finally deciding to move closer. That exact moment is what separates a properly placed trap from failed one. The instant the fox lets its guard down and steps onto the concealed patch of ground. The powerful steel jaws snap shut around its leg before it has time to react. Many foxes try to bolt away in panic, but the steel cable anchored deep into the ground keeps the trap firmly in place. That is one of the reasons steel foothold traps continue to be used throughout many rural parts of the United States, even after decades of use. However, for professional wildlife control specialists, setting traps is not simply about catching a silly fox. What matters more is understanding how they move, where they hide, and why they're venturing closer to residential areas more than ever before. As natural food sources continue to decline and farms expand deeper into wild territory, encounters like these are becoming almost unavoidable. And beneath the quiet night skies of Montana, the silent battle of wits between humans and red foxes continues night after night along the narrow trails cutting through the cold, open fields.
As night falls across the vast grasslands of Wyoming, the howls of wolves begin echoing from the dark pine forest in the distance. At first, those sounds were rare, only heard near the end of winter, but just a few years later, their tracks started appearing everywhere around livestock grazing areas. Young calves vanished without a trace. Fences were torn apart, and many ranchers began staying awake through the night to patrol around their herds. In many rural parts of Wyoming, encounters with wolves are no longer uncommon. With their ability to hunt in coordinated packs, they can reach a herd within minutes and disappear back into the darkness before anyone has time to react. Because of that, many ranchers have completely changed the way they protect their livestock. Instead of relying only on rifles or livestock guardian dogs like they once did, they have started using controlled trapping systems designed to reduce wolf activity around grazing areas. I arrived in Wyoming in early spring, when the last patches of snow were still scattered across the dry hillsides. The ranch owner I visited told me they had lost 3 calves in the same area near a small creek behind the pasture in just 2 weeks. What made it even stranger was that the wolves always seemed to appear during the short window between midnight and dawn, when patrol activity had started to slow down. The infrared cameras placed around the fences quickly revealed the reason. A pack of 6 wolves had been moving along the exact same route through a stretch of low brush, using the dark terrain and older sections of fencing to approach the cattle. Our plan was not to wipe out the entire pack, but to stop them from seeing this area as an easy hunting ground. The trapping system was placed directly along the wolves' familiar travel route. Unlike older steel traps, the newer design was built to restrain the animal without causing serious injury. Motion sensors and remote monitoring cameras allowed us to observe the entire area without too much human presence, because wolves are extremely sensitive to unfamiliar scents and disturbances. If they detect anything unusual, the entire pack can disappear for weeks before returning again. For several nights in a row, the wolves continued appearing near the grazing area, while keeping a significant distance from suspicious locations. They watched the fences, sniffed around the pasture, and circled back through their old routes as if checking for every change in the area. It showed that wolves do not hunt on instinct alone. They can remember terrain patterns and react quickly to new threats. That intelligence is exactly what makes them far more difficult to manage than many other predators. By the 5th night, the infrared cameras finally captured the moment we had been waiting for. A large lead wolf stepped onto the narrow trail near the creek, where the trap had been carefully concealed beneath dry grass and soft soil for days. Just seconds later, the automatic restraint system activated. What stood out most was how the other wolves reacted. Instead of rushing into chaos like many animals would, they immediately stopped at a distance, watching closely before letting out long howls toward the forest behind them and disappearing into the darkness. It was a clear sign of the extraordinary coordination within a wild wolf pack. After the lead wolf was captured and relocated away from the area, the behavior of the entire pack began to change noticeably.
There you go. Good boy. All right, buddy.
Here to assist. Cameras around the pasture showed they were no longer approaching the livestock as closely as before, and had gradually started returning to the distant hills to hunt natural wild prey instead.
These wolves are about 50 yards right now.
For many ranchers in Wyoming, the ultimate goal is not to completely remove wolves from the wild, but to maintain a safe distance between wildlife and human life. Across the frozen fields and endless mountain ranges of the American West, the conflict between humans and wild wolves will likely continue for many years to come. But instead of relying only on force or endless pursuit, many people now understand that the most effective way to manage these intelligent predators is by understanding their behavior, their travel routes, and the way they adapt to the world around them.
For many years, foxes have been regarded as the silent predators of rural outskirts, a fleeting shadow, appearing and vanishing before humans can even register their presence. They move along the edges of fields, slip past fences, and weave through pockets of darkness untouched by light. But as the boundary between residential areas and the wild gradually blurs, encounters are no longer rare. Foxes are now appearing closer than ever, just behind chicken coops, beside organic waste bins, or along familiar paths leading out to the fields. Foxes do not hunt at random. They observe, remember, and learn from every small detail in their environment. A safe route, a low disturbance area, or a place where food was once found, all of it is retained like an invisible map in their memory. And once a stable movement pattern is established, they will return to the exact same path, repeating their behavior over consecutive nights with remarkable precision. For this reason, effective control cannot rely on chance. Instead, many farms have shifted toward a more discreet approach, padded foothold traps with restraint covers. These traps are designed to hold the animal in place without causing serious harm when used correctly. Unlike cage traps that are easily spotted in open spaces, this system nearly disappears into the natural landscape. The loop is carefully concealed with fine soil, dry leaves, and surrounding materials, making the trap site appear completely undisturbed, as if no human intervention had ever taken place. After multiple nights of observation using infrared cameras, managers have identified a consistent pattern. Foxes rarely approach bait directly.
Later.
Instead, they circle, pause, observe, and only then move forward in short, cautious steps. For that reason, traps are not placed at the bait itself, but in a transition zone, where the animal is compelled to step through as it leaves cover and moves into open ground. This is the point where the front paw is almost certain to land. When triggered, the restraint mechanism distributes pressure evenly around the leg, firm enough to hold, yet without causing a harsh impact. This not only helps minimize injury, but also reduces the animal's panic response. In the initial phase, the entire area is handled with minimal interference. Operators wear gloves, limit scent traces, and avoid repeated movement around the set location. Bait is not presented openly, but instead dispersed subtly in the form of scent, just enough to trigger curiosity without raising suspicion. Once the system has fully blended into the environment, the activation phase truly begins. And here, technology plays a crucial role. Sensors are integrated directly into the trap, sending near-instant signals to the handler's device. This significantly shortens response time, an essential factor for any live restraint system. The operator can quickly reach the site, use a cover to calm the animal, assess its condition, and proceed according to established protocols. In locations where humane models are applied, health checks and relocation to a more suitable environment are always mandatory steps. Alongside trapping, many farms also proactively adjust their surroundings. Fencing is reinforced, poultry areas are secured at night, motion-activated lights are installed in dark zones, and all leftover food sources are removed. As the environment becomes less attractive, fox activity gradually declines. This is a critical part of the overall strategy, not just control, but prevention at its root. Ultimately, traps are only tools. True effectiveness lies in the ability to read movement patterns, understand behavioral habits, and intervene at the right moment. When implemented with precision and responsibility, these methods not only protect farms, but also help preserve the fragile balance between humans and the wild, where both can coexist without conflict, within sustainable limits.